If anybody comes, we'll take care. So let me. So we have, in fact, good morning to good afternoon to all of you. After a month or so, we again have the opportunity of COVID to a web meeting because I am day by day feeling comfortable with this mode. I don't know why. Though there are a lot of difficulties, yet somehow we are getting used to this method of working and also this presentation so that we can learn during this period. Anupama has also joined in. So we can learn during this period also. So in this situation in April when me and my friend Prosenjit and Sujata met, we decided to start thinking about something to learn. So in that context I said, okay, let me look at revised code of ethics because that's a new thing that has come in. So I started looking at it, and I have to thank Anupama here because she also helped me taking printouts and all, and of these code of ethics. So code of ethics has been there for so long from the beginning, but frankly speaking, I have never bothered to look at it in my practicing career of the last 20 years. So whatever is the reason, not been. So I thought this is the best of times to understand what is code of ethics and ensure that we take care of the uh, basics of code of ethics so that at least we are knowing what is code of ethics when we work. And as a student also, it is better to learn about code of ethics at this point of time rather than just learn something in your final examination and just forget about it like the way we would have done at that time. But day by day the code of ethics is becoming very important. Therefore it is very much in the scheme of things that we should start knowing more about it. Some of the parts we would have dealt when we did the meetings of in which Krishna and Arjuna dialogues were there. Now we can revisit it with a better knowledge of code of ethics. So in that context, I'll do. Before I proceed, I just want to make, in case if I get disconnected, I'll reconnect. Just wait. In case you get disconnected, just reconnect. I will accept it. Okay. Because and 30 minutes later there might be a disruption. Just wait. I'll reconnect again because the new thing. Same login password should be same. So what are the main topics of coverage? There's the introduction and code of ethics of the 2009 one. The earlier one was in 2009. Now it is 2019 and 20 and all that. The next one is publication of ICAI and new code of ethics. What have they done? Under that, what are the things that is coming? Fundamental principles, then threat to compliance of fundamental principles, safeguards to how can you reduce these threats? How can you take safeguards to reduce the impact of the threats? Then we'll understand, try to go and understand the structure of the new code. What are the major changes that has happened in the code of ethics from with respect to the 2009 one and code of ethics part 2 relating to domestic situation. Along with that, it is very important to understand a little bit about CA Act, first schedule, second schedule. This is all basically they are covering. There is some more things to be covered, but these are broad structure that we are looking at. So maybe a little bit is a little theoretical, yet it is better to understand this theory and build on based on that we can have another session on this where we look at some case laws so that that will be more interesting. But I couldn't fit all the case laws here because this is quite a lot of time it will take. At least 30-40 minutes I want to round up. Okay, but that maybe we'll do it in this another session. First, we need to understand how does it come? Where do the institute source these standards? It is from the Ethics Standard Board issued by the Institute of International Ethics Standard Board of the ISBA. What is ISBA? ISBA is coming under IFAC. IFAC is the International Federation of Accountants. So under IFAC, there is a Ethics Standard Board which issues the standards which is adopted by the institute. So in 2009, when the institute brought the ICAI Code of Ethics, It was based on the revision made by ISBA in 2005. So based on that, ICI revised it in 2009. And similarly now, what Institute has done is it has taken the 2018 edition of ISBA Code of Ethics, and that has been revised into 2009, applicable from 1st April 2020. However, again, it has been postponed to July 2020 due to COVID pandemic. And then from July 1st, it has been applicable except for certain clauses which they have again held back. We'll see that later. So this is the basic understanding. So how does the standards are built? It is basically IFAC. Under IFAC is the Ethics Standard Code, ISBA, which frames it. We take it from there. From there, we will take it and do it. The old code, 2009, look at it. Part A, Part B. First part, always the first part we'll see later on in this also. The first part is the general principles and all the first three chapters, chapter 1 to 3. This is again 2009, not the current one. 2009 we are talking about. It is based on the IFAC ISBA Code of Ethics 2005, the old one. Part B is some of the parts which is required for the Indian context. That is what is the part B for Indian domestic provisions. Domestic Indian provisions is what it comes. So therefore, that's how we are looking at part A and part B in the old 2009. And there are some appendices which have to be taken from A to F. This was what was existing. Now the new one, the book looks like this. They have been segregated into three booklets: Code of Ethics, Code of Ethics 2, Volume 2, and Code of Ethics Volume 3. What is it? Simply like the earlier one at the bottom, it's given C. Volume 1 based on ASBA Code of Ethics 2018. Volume 2 is domestic issues with reference to CA Act. And the last one is Volume 3, relevant disciplinary cases, which is coming under this. So what they have done is, here they were part A, part B. Now they have made it into separate booklets. That is Code of Ethics first one. That is actually issued in 2019, the first part, which is what we will be discussing more now. And Code of Ethics part 2 also we'll discuss, which is with relevant to domestic issues and with reference to CA Act. That is what is coming in part 2. That is the domestic adaptation of all these things. And last one is the case laws, which is very, very important. Now, Code of Ethics part 1, that is this particular one, that one, what are the content? First one, as we have discussed in the contents, is fundamental principles and conceptual framework. This is what they have. There is a drastic change that has been done. So therefore, we look at it. Part 2 is professional accountants in service. How does it do? Professional accountants in public practice. Under that, you got, that is public practice. Then independent standards, 4A and 4B, which is what is independence for audit and review engagements, independence for assurance engagements other than audit and review. So that's how it has been made into 4 parts basically. 1, fundamental principles, we'll look at it. 2, professional accounts in service. We are not going to go in brief. Then professional accounts in public practice, independent standards. Independent standards, under the independent, there are 2 parts, part A, part B. Okay, that's a basic structure in which the chapter, this particular one is being done. Fundamental principles, that's the first one. We are talking about this first one. This fundamental principles. What are the fundamental principles? First one, these are all we know. It's not that we don't know. We are going through this on a day-to-day basis in our normal life also. So first, the professional accountant is irrespective of whether he's in service or in profession as a practicing chartered accountant, this is applicable. This is integrity, being straightforward and honest in all professional relationship. Objectivity, not allow bias, conflict of interest, or undue influence of others to override professional judgments. Professional competence and due care, maintain professional skill and skill at the level required to ensure that the client or employer receives a competent professional advice or service based on the current development practice. What is the point in talking about VAT? Today GST is there. You need to know GST. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Otherwise, you say, I don't know. I mean, nothing wrong. When you're going to advise, ensure that you are up to date, and based on that, you give this advice. So ABC is integrity, objectivity, professional competence. Then confidentiality, very, very important. That means we are not supposed to disclose client information. So we have to be very careful with the client information. We are not supposed to. That is why all this thing that now data is going here and there. Fortunately for us, clients are not that much conscious about their data. But a day will come when they are all going to become conscious. They don't want to share data because data is dangerous. It can go to anywhere, and to an extent that you lose the data and somebody else is, taking it and probably using it for anything we don't know. Next one is professional behavior. That means you comply with relevant laws and regulations to avoid any action that discredits the profession. Again, mind you, discredits the profession. It can be anything. We'll come to that. The next important, so fundamental principles are, Kirti, can you mute? So, what are the things? Integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, professional behavior. Next is, what are the threats to complying this thing? So that means fundamental principles are there. Is there any threat to complying with this? Self-interest test. These are new things, new concept that has been brought in. So if you look at it, these are new concepts that have been brought in. Self-interest threat. That means when you are doing it, it may occur as a result of financial or other interest of a professional accountant or relative. Maybe in the job that you're doing, you may be interested, or your relative may be interested. Then there is a self-interest. Self-review threat, which may occur when a previous judgment needs to be reevaluated by a professional accountant responsible. You've already taken a decision on a particular thing. Later on, you may have to take another view. Then there is a self-review. You're reviewing yourself. Even there is a problem. That means when you're going to review yourself, your own work, then there's a problem. I can tell you one situation is even second and third a little different. I mean, similar advocacy threats, which may occur when a professional accountant promotes a position or opinion to the point that subsequent objectivity may be compromised. So both are similar. The then first one is basically you take a judgment and again you may have to reevaluate it. For example, I have taken a decision of say 1/3 disallowance in the tax audit report. But later on, when we go for the presentation as the representative of the assessee, we may accept for a 75% disallowance. So therefore, we are ourselves doing a self-review of what we did accepted earlier. So that comes here, and we'll see why these are being considered self-threat today. It was not like that in the earlier code, but today these type of things are creating a problem because we are contradicting ourselves. In the report when we gave, we said 1/3. Later on, when we are going to go to the income tax officer and say, okay, 75% is okay, you add so much in the disallowance, it creates a problem. Therefore, there is a self-review. You are reviewing yourself again. Similarly, advocacy is which may seem like that. What you do today may have an impact on the subsequent objectivity may be compromised. So some position that you take later on, what you're going to do may be different. Maybe later on we can see examples like that. Then familiarity threat. That means if you are too close to the client, it becomes a problem. You become too familiar with the client. So that also is a problem. So that is again a threat. Intimidation. Sometimes the clients are so powerful that they try to force your opinion on you. Then that also becomes a problem. That's what is intimidation threats. Now, how do you safeguard these threats? So basically, these 5 threats are what is listed. How do you safeguard them? One is created by profession, legislation or regulation include, but not restricted to. You educate yourself, train yourself, experience, gather experience. So when you go to the bank audit, we have already seen, I think Aishwarya will vouch for it, when they met the manager at Kotarakara branch, it was very difficult. So, these are how to handle people itself is a big thing. So similarly, all these threats are difficult to handle. When somebody is intimidating you, you should know how to manage it. Continuing professional education development. See, this is also one thing that you're seeing that I'm trying to understand professional code of ethics, the revised one. Why? Because I need to keep it abreast of what is happening. Similarly, corporate governance regulations, SEBI rules. You have to be updated. You cannot say I studied it during my CA course and then I don't know anything about it. It's very difficult to say that today. You have to know. So that if you know it, you take care. Like I'm doing it. I am taking care of understanding professional, this code of ethics today, the revised one. Why? Because I have to know professional standards. Now, if I don't know this, how will you know there is a self threat or a intermediate threat or some other threat? Professional standards, professional or regulatory monitoring and disciplinary procedures. We'll come to disciplinary procedures a little later. External review by legally empowered third party of the reports, returns, communication. So you can expect somebody else to come and verify. We already have a peer review method where some other auditor will come and verify our audit reports. Safeguards in the work environment, firm-wide safeguards, compliance with fundamental principles, act in public interest, document policies and procedures for what? To implement and monitor quality of controlling of engagement like we do checklists, identify the threats, identify the application of safeguards for assurance engagement, documented independent policy, and so on. So many other you can go through it. Similarly, to monitor and manage the reliance on revenue from a single client. I am always said that we should not over depend ourselves on a particular client. What happens then is we start thinking, oh, yo, what if that client goes away, what will going to happen? Similarly, use different partners engaging team with separate reporting lines. For example, GST can be done by one partner. We don't have that situation here, but then can be done by one partner, and company audit can be done by different persons. So one partner doesn't get too much influence with a client, right? So that is how you can safeguard. That is, you are mitigating the risk of threats that we have discussed earlier. These are methods. Similarly, timely communication of firms' policies and procedures, including any change to them, to all partners and professional staff. For example, as I was telling to somebody, there was a net worth certificate to be given to one of our clients. I told clearly, see, I need these papers, otherwise I cannot do it because I have to take UDIN. Now it is not easy. I have to make sure that I have to bill you also for that. I cannot give you free service because we cannot just give. There's a lot of work. And all the papers that I get based on this only I give you a certificate. I trust you fully. I accept everything. But for me, tomorrow I have to show the paper. So like that, we have to convince the client. Designating a member of the next one. Designating a member of the senior management to be responsible for overseeing the adequate function of the firm's quality control. So these can be done. Advising partners and professional staff of those assurance clients rating for which they must be independent. So we have to keep on telling the staff as well as partners to make sure that they should be independent. They should not get into any closeness with the client. That is why I have to be very careful in this, that if some client, that's why I keep rotating the staff. If you look at it, one client, I don't, next time somebody else is. One reason is you will also get exposed to different clients. And I think why that comfort, though the client would want the same article or the same staff to interact with them. But then the problem is, it is not good, better not good. So that, this type of closeness will not come. That is also one reason we do that. Similarly, other things are there, safeguards for threats involving an additional professional accountant to review the work or otherwise advice necessary. Consulting an independent third party, like a committee of independent directors, a professional regulatory body, to take care whether we are doing it in the right way, discuss ethical issues, and so on. So many are there you can do. I'm not reading it because it doesn't make sense. Some of them are like, even you can look at safeguards within the client system and procedures. That means when a client appoints a firm of public practice, firm in public practice to perform an engagement, persons other than management ratify or approve the appointment. That's a good practice. So these are not something mandatory. You're saying that if somebody is to be appointed, a third party rather than the client's people can have a third party to ratify the appointment so that it gets the blessings of a third party. So the relationship is not cozy. So there is above the board transaction can be done. So that is basically the safeguards that we are talking about. You can read through this at a later time, all these details. Now, the structure of the Code of Ethics 2019 is similar to this. Part 1, as we saw, the first book, applicable to all accountants, code complying with code, fundamental conceptual work, and it has got Part 2 and Part 3, which is all these things are the first part, okay, the first part of the book, the first book. Part 2 is professional accountants in business. Next one is professional accountants in this practice. Now, what is in business basically is those who are in service. And public practices like us, we are practicing. Then international independent standards 4A, 4B. If you look at it, that is independence for audit and reviews. They have given sections. I have not, unfortunately, missed out the sections here, even Part A, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. This is all, mind you, this is all coming in the first booklet. Okay, don't get mixed up. This is coming in the first booklet. International independence standards, independence for audit and reviews, independence for other audit engagements, 900, 999. These are the sections in which it is coming. So again, I'm just going to tell you which one we are talking about. This one, this first one is what they have talked about. This one, okay. The contents. This is what we are talking about in that format. See, if you look at it, page number 1 to this, but there are sections also. I've not taken out. So if you look at it, this is the breakup: part 1, part 2, part 3, and independent standard. Then they have got glossary. So that is what is given by ESBA, which is what is coming. Now let us look at what are the major changes in the Code of Ethics 2019 by ESBA itself, so which has been adopted by us. Number 1, independence requirement for audit and review engagements other than and other assurance engagement differentiated. And there should be an and here, and it has come. Independence requirement for audit and review engagements and assurance engagement, which means that if you look at it here, independence for audit and reviews, independent for other assurance, they have been separated. Earlier it was together. Now they have brought it separately. 4A, 4B. Independent standards recharacterize that international independent standard. That was only independent section number 290, I think. Change in the drafting convention. Some places they have used instead of should, which was earlier, shall. New pattern of structuring of sections. Earlier it was only section. It was there in a different way. Now they have given requirements for each and every section. R with the R. I'm not getting into that. At some point of time we can read it. Increase clarity of the responsibility of the compliance firms, network firms, individual within firms. There are some clarity. Similarly, changes from ESPA code. How is it different ours? Changes made under the following code. I mean, ESPA code is there, but under us there is a little bit of change which we have adopted. Where domestic provision is stricter than corresponding ESPA provision, total bar and accounting by the statutory order. Some one example. Where domestic requirement governs the issue of network, would only refer to network registered in ICAI. That means in the ESPA it's talking about network. In our thing, we are talking about network which is registered with ICAI only. What is the network? Network is a agreement between 2 or more audit firms to get into a joint work or something like that. Where a domestic requirement has no corresponding provision in ESBA. This one, firm rotation. In ESBA, they have not given, but we have it. Language changes, for example, professional accountant in business mentioned as professional accounting service as per the Chartered Account Act. So in our thing, we are mentioning it as professional accounting in service instead of business. That are the major changes where we have changed it from the ESBA code. Another important thing that has come is the NOCLAR. NOCLAR, please go, you're going to remember, you're going to hear about it quite a lot, and it's dangerous. NOCLAR means non-compliance with laws and regulations. What does it mean? That means as you do the audit and you find some non-compliance with any other law, mind you, or suspected NOCLAR committed or about to be committed by the client or the employer or by those charged with governance, management, employees of the client, what we are supposed to do, accepting the we come to know about it, accepting the professional accountant, accepting that professional accountant as a prima facie ethical responsibility to not turn a blind eye to the matter. NOCLAR was introduced to guide him to deal with the situation, considering how best to serve the public, which means that you are doing an audit. You see when you go through this, some payment for some penalty or something has been given, which is actually, say, for example, bribery or something, God only knows. Then we are supposed to report. Or something which is not okay, which comes as you verified, then we are supposed to disclose. Now, laws and regulations having nexus to professional accountants, professional training and expertise, having direct effect on the determination of material amount disclosures, compliance of which fundamental to the entity's business, compliance necessary to avoid material penalties. So, what are the things that needs to be covered is what they have given. It should be coming under NOCLAR. We have to definitely report. Having direct effect on the determination of material amount and disclosure in the finance statement. And something which is going to have an impact on the finance disclosure, you have to report that. And there is a problem there, we are seeing it. compliance of which fundamental to the entity's business, compliance necessary to avoid material penalties. So those are things that will have to be reported. Now, as per ESBA, what are the examples that are covered under NOCLAR? Fraud, corruption, bribery, money laundering, terrorist financing, proceeds of crime, securities market and trading, banking and other financial services, data protection, environmental things, tax and pension liabilities, and so on. These are all things that are coming under NOCLAR, which has been given in the ethics code. Following matters are not in the scope of NOCLAR. Clearly, in some small things, say for example, traffic fine. It doesn't make sense to us for a company paying traffic fines. Personal misconduct unrelated to the business activity, not relating to activities personally. Somebody, the director, is involved. You know, non-compliance other than by the client or employer. Other than client and somebody else non-compliant, we are not bothered. So therefore, TA to address NOCLAR only when and if he encounters the same in the course of providing a professional service to him. In 2019 code, it has been initially made applicable to auditors, employees, list of listed companies, mind you. Now it is applicable for listed companies. However, now what they have done on 1/7 when this was adopted by the council, due to the prevailing COVID-19 situation, that is NOCLAR has been deferred till further notification. But you should know about it. It's better to know about it. In the near future, it will be brought in, NOCLAR. Similarly, independent standards, what has happened? 2009, independent assurance standard. 2019 is for part A, part B. We've already discussed it. Not only that, it has been renamed as independent standards against section. Earlier it was section. Now it's been called independent standards. Now, another important change, taxation service to audit clients. We are doing it, especially large clients. If you are doing that, then what happens is what we have to look at. So, ICAI Code of Ethics says that taxation to audit clients include compliance, planning, provision of formal taxation opinions, and assistance in the resolution of tax disputes, such as are generally not seen to create threats. What is this? The 2009, the earlier one. Let us look at what is it saying for the current one. Further guidance on taxation matters provided. Generally, it states that the providing tax service to audit client might create a self-review or advocacy. This is what I told you. If we are ourselves doing tax service for the client for which we have done audited, there is an issue of tax self-review or advocacy threat. Usually no threat. Tax return preparation, no problem. But if you are going to give taxation under that other tax services, it will come. Tax calculation for the purpose of preparing accounting entries that will be subsequently audited. For example, you are creating a provision entry, provision for tax. Definitely there is a question of self-review threat. So mind you, these are all changing dynamics that is happening. We may not have that much of a problem, but large clients, large auditors are going to have a serious problem. Already, a lot of big auditors are slowly, bifurcating the work of tax audit separately or tax guidance, tax matter separately and audit separately. Maybe two audit firms. Tax planning and other advisory services might create self-review advocacy. Appropriate safeguards to be taken. What can you do? How can you avoid it? Using professionals who are not in the audit team to perform the service, having an appropriate reviewer not involved in providing the service, review the audit work. Tax service involving valuations might perform only when the result of valuation will have a direct effect on the finance statements. Then only you can do, otherwise you are not supposed to. Will not have a direct impact. Sorry. If it have a direct impact, you are not supposed to. Assistance in resolution of tax disputes might create a self-review or advocacy threat. Again, you are getting into tax resolutions. Then you have to be careful. But again, this one also has been postponed till further notification because of the COVID situation. We don't know when it's going to come. Now, hold back. I think the time will go down after some time. At that time, you have to log in again. Okay, it's there. 8 minutes there. We'll try to go ahead. Now, documentation. Again, documentation. Earlier, it was not this stringent, but today, in 2019, the requirements of documentation given in greater detail. Also, NOCLAR requires all steps in responding NOCLAR to be documented, mind you. Documentation. That's the word. What is it? Fees relative, relative size. What is that meaning? In the revised code, that is 2019, where for 2 consecutive years, total gross annual professional fee from an audit client and its related entities represent more than 15% of the total fees. That means your total fees should not be, your fees to a particular client should not be more than 15% of your total annual fees. The firm shall disclose. If it is so, they have to disclose it to those charged with governance of that company, TCWG. Similar, but no such feeling on total fees of the firm would be applicable where such fees does not exceed 5 lakhs. So that means if the 15% doesn't exceed 5 lakhs, no problem, no problem, there's no issue. If it goes beyond that, especially for large audit firms, it will be an issue. No such ceiling on total fees would be applicable in case of audit of government companies, public undertaking, nationalized banks, all these things. So these appointments are not covered there. Maybe you're getting more. For example, somebody who's doing bank audit at the central audit level, they may be giving a large fee, but that will not be covered under this relatives. Again, this also has been deferred for the time being because of COVID situation. Now this deferment has happened, mind you, just on first institute council meeting happened on 30th and 1st. You know, when the exams were all postponed, no? In that meeting only they have decided. Criteria for indebtedness. What has been happened? What has 2018 court said? Brought a concept of materiality of loans and guarantees. Whether loan or guarantee is material would depend on the combined network of the individual and his immediate family members. Therefore, you have to be careful in the materiality of guarantees. If there is any indebtedness. Same concept have been adopted in Code of Ethics. Application of safeguards. The revised code, application of safeguards required when necessary to eliminate threats. So, if you are able to eliminate it, that is very good. But if you're not able to eliminate, then you reduce them to an acceptable level which is reasonable and informed, which a reasonable and informed third party would conclude is acceptable. That means, what is acceptable level? Somebody who is a third party will accept it. That is it's in the acceptable level. Not you yourself saying this is acceptable. Somebody from the outside has to accept it, that this is okay. That is called acceptable level, not your own judgment of acceptable level. Previously, safeguards had to be considered a threat was other than clearly insignificant. Then only you should think now acceptable level is a little, not a little subjective. Therefore, better to take the consent of a third party, informed third party, so that he can accept it as acceptable. Public interest entities, again very important. 2019 contains a new term called PIE, Enhanced Independent Requirement for PIE in the new code. Public interest means what is definition as per its thing, extended by inclusion of banks and insurance has been also included there. Therefore, when we do bank audit, we have to be careful because PIE is basically where public is interested. Firms encouraged to determine whether to treat an additional entity as PIE because of large number of stakeholders. Even large companies may become a PIE because there are large number of stakeholders there. Gifts and hospitalities, again you have to be careful. Inducements have been elaborated. We are not looking at detail, I'm just giving you the changes so that we try to understand. Later on, if there is a need with examples, we'll see in the second code later on. To first see whether prohibited by law or not. Offering also prohibited. Then reasonable and informed third party testing, whether it is with intent to improperly influence the behavior of the recipient or another. Why did you get this? Is it just an offering just like that? It's okay without any mistake. See, when we go for bank audit, sometimes at the end of the period they may give some cash. I mean, it is after signing. They don't give it before that. So again, that judgment is what we need to take. If we take, they give, fine. We don't ask them to give, right? We don't ask them. So again, that is by their own goodwill they are giving it. Sometimes they do that. Some calendar they may give. Clarification about appropriate boundaries for offering and accepting of inducements. Extend to PAs, that is public accounting service, also these things, tips and hospital. Total provision in case of audit assurance plans to continue for these things. Now we come to the quality assurance mechanism of the institute. How does it work? So that is something which we need to do it. But I'll just do one thing. I'll stop and restart it again so that we can do it. Just give me a minute. So what you see is the quality assurance mechanism. You look at it. First, we have got the quality review board. set up by section 28 of the CA Act. It consists of 11 members, chairperson, and 5 members nominated by the government to review quality of service by members, recommendation to ICI, guidance to members. QRB team can visit firms. So therefore, their job is to tell what is to be the quality of services to be rendered. So they will review. If they want, they can visit the audit firms and review it. The next one is Financial Reporting Review Board. This is non-standing committee of ICI. Only council members, no co-opted members, review of financial reporting by members, recommendation to ICI, guidance to members, review on basis of published accounts and additional documents. So, what are the difference? This is for some outside members are also there. So they may be visiting some audit firms required to judge the quality of how they are doing. They can review the quality of the members and make recommendations to the institute. Second one is generally whenever the listed companies are there, public companies are there, where the audit reports are already available, that will be taken and reviewed by this board, mainly constituting of the members of the institute. Peer review board, as you say, is again a non-standing committee of ICI. What it does is it ensures that in carrying out the assurance, comply with technical, professional, ethical standards, including other regulatory requirements, have in place proper systems, including documentation. Members appointed by board as reviewers will visit the practice units. Like I can become a peer reviewer. I've got more than 15 years of experience. I can become a peer reviewer. What I have to do is some practice unit like our firm may be selected for peer review. Then the peer review board will send a letter. Please go there and verify and carry out the review. I will be trained for that. And then I have to issue a certificate, or I have to give the report to peer review board, and then they will issue the certificate that peer review has been done. When you get the peer review certificate, it means what? The institute is saying, yes, they are following these ethical standards and professional standards which are required, mandated by us, has been maintained. And especially if you understand that certain audits, now they are asking whether your firm has been peer reviewed. Like that, they are asking now. So therefore, it is better, it is a stamp of approval by the institute. Taxation, now this is a new one. Taxation Audit Quality Review Board. Taxation means the tax audit report. Institute itself, like the FRRB, this is for the Financial Reporting Board. This is the tax audit quality report, new non-standing committee formed to perform review of taxation audit reports in line with FRRB. This is what is being given. Now, how does this work? The disciplinary thing, how does it work in the institute? First is the disciplinary directorate under section 31, headed by an officer of the institute, designated as director discipline. Employees of for making investigation in respect of an information or complaint. That means this is the office under which the disciplinary proceedings start. I mean, they are the people who actually manage this whole thing. It's like an office of disciplinary committee. Next comes the Board of Discipline. These are sections under the CA Act 21, 21A and on. What is it? Board of Discipline. President or Vice President of Council as the presiding officer, one elected council member, President or Vice President, one elected member, person of eminence having experience in the field of law, economics, and etc. can be nominated into that. Yes. Then comes Disciplinary Committee, which is a little more higher than the earlier one. Because if you look at the number of members are more. Presiding officer appointed by the council, who it is from the outside, and having knowledge of this thing and the profession, maybe president, vice president, or senior member can also be taken. Two elected council members, two members to be nominated by central government from amongst the persons of eminence. So outsiders are also involved. Council may constitute more disciplinary committees if they want. They can have one or many. Appellate authority, central government shall by notification constitute an appellate. So that means if you are agreed with the decision of the disciplinary committee or the board of discipline, the board of discipline, this is the disciplinary committee, then what happens is that you can, the government can put up an appellate authority again to which the chartered accountant, if he's agreed, he can approach. That is what the appellate authority. This charts gives you the total picture of the how the things move. I'm not getting into that little detail because we need to look at what comes under what. In the next few slides, we'll understand it. But this gives a flow chart of the events. You can see it at later time, or maybe we can discuss it later. Because if I do that, you get a little confused. So I'm just leaving it. as to, you can go through it and try to understand, and we can discuss later. But if you see, there are certain things that second schedule, first schedule. So what are the schedules? We look at it, then coming to this maybe a little easier. Same thing here, matters before the board of discipline, which is to be done. The chart is given there. We look at it a little later. I don't want to confuse them. Just put it here that so that this comes in the framework of how the whole disciplinary procedures happen. Now let us come to the code of ethics part 2. If you look at 3 books I showed, this is the second part. Now what is the difference between one? One is general in you know the overall this thing. Here it is the basic requirement as per the domestic requirement. So if you look at it, you'll understand better. So first schedule, the second schedule we are talking about. Under that, what are the things that is there? Professional misconduct in relation to chartered accountant practice, chartered accountant service, general in relation to members generally, other misconduct. Please, what are the first schedule? Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. Can you understand this? First schedule, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. What are the things? First one is practice, service, general, generally all members, and other misconduct. Because each of them we are going to look at what is coming under that. Similarly, what is second schedule? Sorry. What is second schedule? Again, part 1 in that is in practice, members of institute generally. Service we are not talking about second schedule. Just wait. We are not talking about second schedule. Sorry, in the second schedule, service is not mentioned. We'll see why. Only part 1, part 2, part 3. That means the second one is not there. First one, third one, fourth one. These 3 are there only in this one. That's why there are 3 only. Then other things that are coming is council guidelines for advertisement, other guidelines and all are covered under the volume. So what is coming under first schedule, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, we'll be looking at it. And you have to tell me what is the difference. Part 1, professional misconduct in relation to chartered accountant practice. Clause, these are 12 clauses are there in the first one. That means in this, how many clauses? 12 clauses. That's what we're looking at. Allowing non-CA to practice in his name. That means I am allowing somebody else to non-CA to practice in my name. Sharing fees or profits with a non-CA. I'm sharing my profits with somebody, the non-CA. Receiving shares and profits from a non-CA. I'm getting profits. First one is I'm sharing. Another one is receiving. Entering in partnership person other than CA in practice. So I am entering into practice somebody who is not in CA practice. Securing professional business by non-permitted means. You can understand what are non-permitted means. Solicitation of work. That is, you are trying to ask for work with people. Advertisement of professional and other achievements. Non-communication with previous auditor. Mind you, every time I ask, non-communication with previous auditor. Accepting an audit appointment without ascertaining company law requirements. That means, what are the company law requirements? Have you followed it? Without that, you are doing it. That's wrong. Charging fees on the basis of percentage or contingencies. You are charging fees based on a certain percentage. See, I will give you, this decision from the officer. You please give me so much. Or I am telling, this is your turnover. Please give me this much fees. Not allowed. Engaging business occupation other than CA. In the chartered accountant in practice cannot get into business and profession. Which means, can he never go? Yes, you can, but that depends. You have to take permission. So, and anything other than this you do, they have to take permission. Allowing persons other than practicing CA to sign on his behalf. You are asking somebody to sign on your behalf. You know these are not allowed anyway, but these are clearly given. So what you need to understand in the first and second schedule, what is given is the red lights. These are the red lights. Please don't go into this area. That is what is the object of first and second schedule. Under that, they have given categories of part 1. What is part 2? Part 2 is professional misconduct in of chartered accounts and service. That means you are sharing your emoluments. Emoluments is salary with somebody else. Accepting part of the fees, etc., from professionals engaged by employer. So that means you are sharing with somebody the fees. Receiving shares and profit from a non-CA, not allowed. Obviously, the numbers are less. 3 clauses only there for a person in service, but these are important. Generally, for all members, what is generally? Not being clause 1, not being a fellow of the institute acts as one. So that means what? I am still an ACA, but I am acting around as if I am a fellow FCA. It is wrong, right? You are misrepresenting yourself. He does not, next one, he does not supply the information called for or does not comply with the requirements asked for by the institute. That means if the institute is asking something either by its committees or director or whatever, you don't comply with it, then it's the professional misconduct. Therefore, what it means is institute is God, whatever they ask, please comply. You cannot be saying, who cares about it. If you're a member with a practicing member, you have to be, not only practicing member, even in service, you have to be careful because it's general. Similarly, while inviting professional work from another chartered accountant or while responding to tenders or inquiries or by advertising through a write-up or anything, as provided in item 6 and 7 of part 1 of the schedule, gives information knowing it to be false. That means item 6 and 7 is what? Solicitation of work, advertisement. All these are, you are giving a wrong information, then it's wrong. That is also not allowed. This is for whom? Any member, not in only profession, in practice, but also in service, both is applicable. Other misconduct is held by guilt by any civil or criminal court of an offence which is punishable with imprisonment for a term exceeding 6 months. That means you are punished by a court or civil or criminal court for more than 6 months, can be taken as other misconduct. And the last part, in the opinion of the council, brings disrepute to the profession or institute as a result of its action, whether or not related to the professional work. What it means is, suppose you get into a fight with your neighbor and you hit him. This can, that fellow, if he knows the law of the institute, he can complain to the institute and will be taken as a misconduct. What misconduct? Other misconduct. If you get a traffic fine also, be careful. It can be construed as a misconduct because anything that brings disrepute, because as a professional of the institute, you are supposed to show the trust that you follow the law. If you don't do that, you will be held responsible. That's what it matters. Now let us look at second schedule, professional misconduct in relation to chartered accounts in practice. Again, under practice part 1. So mind you, let's look at it again. This we have finished these three. The second schedule in misconduct in relation to chartered accounts in practice is what we are looking at. Disclosure of information without consent of the client. So submitting report without verification of finance statement, certifying estimated earnings, audit of concern in which having substantial interest, failure to disclose material facts, failure to report material misstatement, grossly negligent, failure to obtain both. So if you look at this part 1 and this part 1, what is the difference that you see? Can you identify? If you look at it, this one is second schedule part 1. This one is first schedule part 1. What is the relationship? Is there any difference between the two? Yes, there is a difference. This is primarily between chartered accountants or within the chartered accountant world. It is not involving outsiders, in the sense outside is not affected by this, right? It is like, for example, non-communication with the previous audit. It is between auditors. Except charging fees on the basis of percentage. Again, you are not supposed to do that. Others may be accepting it. But here, if you look at it, this one, disclosure of information without consent, as we saw, confidentiality. You are going against confidentiality. Therefore, the other party, other than chartered accountant, like your client, is getting affected. Therefore, what is happening is, it is a misconduct under Schedule 2. Mind you, Schedule 2 is relating to activities that have an impact on outsider, whereas Schedule 1 primarily is relating to your own professional chartered accountant world. In that, if there is any problem, that is controlled by first schedule, and this one is, which is more serious, part 1 or 2. I believe second one is more serious because you are affecting somebody outside. This is within our world, within our offices, within our CA institute. So, but this is with the outsider. Therefore, this has to be taken very carefully. So, audit of concerns, failure to disclose material fact, failure to report material statement, grossly negligent, failure to obtain. For example, grossly negligent means what? In a balance sheet, if you look at it, there is a balance sheet which has cash in the liability side. Can you imagine? A cash in the negative side? It has happened. That is grossly negligent. Therefore, it will be punishable under second schedule. Failure to obtain sufficient information, failure to report material departures in accounts, failure to claim, failure to keep clients' money in a separate account and using the same for its purpose. Very important. That means even if the money is coming to us, this tax audit and all that, for not tax audit, the advanced tax and all, so we are getting it in our another account. But if it is coming within the client's our account, then you have to keep a separate account for that, mind you. And use it only for that purpose. You should not divert that money. What is the second schedule? Second schedule part 2 saying again institute members in generally, mind you, second schedule for professional misconduct for members in service is not there. It's only for people in the practice and generally will include service also. What is it? Contravenes any provision of this act and regulation made thereunder or any guidelines issued by the council. Being an employee of any company, firm, or person discloses confidential information acquired in the course of his employment, except as and when required by law, for the time being imposed, except as permitted by them. That means you are not supposed to, even in your employment, you are not supposed to disclose the information to any third party without approval. But if the law requires you, say court is demanding it, then we can do it. Clause 3 includes any information, statement, return, or form to be submitted to the institute. Again, you have to submit, that all you have to submit, otherwise it will be a problem. Defalcates or embezzles money received in its professional capacity. You take money from the client and then you don't pay back. That's a problem, right? And some type of embezzlement. Last but not the least is clause 3. A member of the institute within practice shall be deemed to be guilty of other misconduct be held guilty by any civil or court like the earlier one, 6 months or more if you are punished severe. Now, you've seen broadly, but again we need to understand in a simple way what is ethics. And this is beautifully defined or said by the first, when the uh, ethics came first. At that time, the institute president was Mr. R.C. Cooper. Institute president way back in 1953 or 54 or sometime, or 63, I'm not sure, 1963. When the ethics was first, this code of ethics was adopted by the institute way back in 1963. At that time, what did the then president R.C. Cooper say? Please read it. I'm just going to read it very carefully. Please read it. Ethics is a state of mind. All we said, all these rules, fine, but just try to understand. Ethics is a state of mind, and there may be some act which, though it may not strictly fall under any of the items of the schedule, may be one which may not be proper by any moral or ethical standards, mind you. That means some act which you have done, though it is not strictly, you cannot identify in any of the schedules that we talk about, yet if you go by the measure of moral or ethical standards, it may not be correct. In the larger interest of the institute, the council exhorts all members to search their hearts and conscience wherever in doubt, and thereby assist towards the maintenance of high principles of professional conduct established by the council. That is what is beautifully mentioned by the then president R.C. Cooper. And another, in continuation that he has mentioned another paragraph. The highest standard of the ethical behavior can only evolve from the conduct of the members, and the council feels sure that whenever members are confronted with two interpretations on a matter relating to professional conduct, one ethical and the other legalistic, they would adopt a stricter interpretation than the more liberal one, even though latter may be perfectly legal. That means you can have a situation where one is ethical, one is, it is legal, but it is not ethical. Then it is always good to take the ethical one than something which is not coming under the ethical thing, but yet perfectly legal. It may be legal, but still don't go by that, go by the ethical one, which is correct. The exercise of highest ethical standards which ensures the progress of institute is in the hands of the members themselves. Beautifully told in the foreword to the first edition by the then president of ICI, R.C. Cooper, 1996. And with this, my students, I just want to tell you that all these years, if you look at it, 30 years I've done, I've not read these code of ethics much, but believe me, these words has what has been in my mind whenever I have been doing a work. Always think of what is ethical and what is not ethical, and take a view based on that. And if you have this in your mind, I don't think you need to know all these ethics. It's good to know, but today, especially, it is better to know all these things in advance rather than at a later stage. But mind you, your state of mind is the best way, and ethics, the state of mind is what he has mentioned. and I perfectly agree with this. I only ask you that we should delve deeper into these things that I have discussed, so that you are very clear in your mind what a chartered account should follow. I have referred some of the PPTs in this from the code of from the December PPT of CA Mangesh Kinare and Code of Ethics publication by ICI. And I want to thank Anupama also. She has helped me a little bit of the compilation part. Thank you very much, and God bless you.